Waldo. Did everyone get a copy of the email that Kelly just sent a little while ago regarding the sample resolution?
I have a prepared pull up too, Matt, if you need it.
Okay. Is Samantha joining us, Ron?
She's on.
Oh, she? Okay. I guess I was just reading your email, Heidi, that was attached to the sample resolution. There is a way of amending the existing sales tax resolution.
Yeah, and it just seems like that would streamline the process. It would skip a bunch of steps because otherwise we'll be waiting on the governor to approve the home rule request, and that could be a lengthy amount of time. I don't know what else is on the legislative agenda, but I can't imagine that it would take a priority for them and be addressed that quickly. So I think that if we can amend the sales tax, which my understanding is that a number of other municipalities have done that as well, then we would be able to move forward with doing so and implementing it that much faster.
Okay. Have you you've had a discussion with Rob about that?
I have had a preliminary discussion with him. He indicated that he also thought it was a good idea to take that step if it meant things would happen faster. We haven't discussed it at length, but I did run it by him, and he thought it was worthwhile to pursue going that direction.
Okay, because I believe we submitted this year the sales tax and the mortgage tax, not too long ago.
Yeah, I believe that was just before the new year.
Right. So could you research to what we would have to do to amend it?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
The only thing that occurs to me that would be implicated with that is that if we then have an across-the-board sales tax, what that would mean as far as the city of Hudson is concerned, since they already have an occupancy tax.
That's a good question.
So that's
maybe that would necessitate us having a separate resolution.
I can tell you. No, go ahead.
Samantha wants to.
Oh, I was just going to say, just from the experience that we've had with other cities, it depends on if they're collecting specifically your TOT tax, as you guys have with like hotels and motels, or if they have like a specific tax adjunct to that. And I know that we do work with quite a few cities that do have cities and counties that do have both. So the county will collect on behalf of the county, and then the city or town has another tax adjunct to that that they're collecting, and that's actually driving through the tax revenue for specific city initiatives, but it is still related to short-term rentals. So depending on what you guys want to do, it has been done before and it has been mapped out in other municipalities that we do work with.
Okay, because I guess our goal would be not to double tax the in Hudson.
right.
So if they're already charging 4% or getting 4% in tax, we don't want to put our 4% on top of theirs.
Correct.
Is that possible, Samantha? Can that be carved out?
Yeah, you just strip them out. So that way we would strip out Hudson, or the town of Hudson at the moment. So that would basically be what we would do, is just carve them out of the contract. And as well, when we're looking at the shape file, just making sure that the town of Hudson is removed.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
So I think this also might involve just a little bit of a discussion. Michael, maybe you and I can touch base so that I can just more fully understand exactly how it's working in the city of Hudson, so that we can avoid the double taxing situation. I'm just not sure. I mean, we could, if we had a sales tax that applied, and I'm just sort of thinking out loud, and it replaced your occupancy tax, and yet the sales tax that was collected on behalf of the city of Hudson still went back to the city of Hudson the way it does currently, I just wouldn't want you to be in a position where you've already contracted with entities that you'd be obligated to pay. And I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But I think there's issues like that that maybe a discussion between us would be helpful to try to iron out.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the city is contracting with like a couple different companies to do some compliance work.
Yeah.
And I don't know timeline. I mean, oftentimes those contracts are short, so there's like a longer term fix. But for 2021, the city is in contract with compliance companies. There's also, I think, a question around the city charges occupancy tax for hotels, motels, and sort of online STRs. And the resolution text that you sent makes it sound like it would be focusing on STRs and not hotels and motels.
Well, I think the confusion was that the sales tax is already being charged to hotels and motels, correct?
Yes.
So,
Right. Although it is in the governor's budget to change that this year. So FYI, and it hasn't passed,
Okay.
but that is the governor's recommendation in both like planks of the budget was to sort of, that was like a budget catch up suggestion, was to add sales tax to all STRs.
okay, so in the city of Hudson right now, both are being collected for hotels and motels, but only one for short-term rentals that are not hotels and motels. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So some entities are paying sales tax, but all lodging entities are paying the lodging tax.
Okay, and I think the way that we had discussed it, and I'm glad we're having this conversation now to clarify, I think the way we had discussed it was that it would be an either or scenario. But if what we're talking about is an occupancy tax that also applies to hotels and motels on top of the sales tax that they're currently paying, I think one of the objectives was to equalize things between short-term rentals and hotels and motels. And it seems like that would then also burden hotels and motels, which I would expect to result in some sort of outcry from them.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and it's only my perspective, is that what we were doing would be equalizing it, not adding an additional tax on top of their existing tax.
Right. So in the case of the city of Hudson, I think, yeah, I think we're just going to have some further discussion as to how to make the city of Hudson consistent with the rest of the county, so that there's no double taxation, and yeah, it's not, a completely different world where it's, unfair in one part of the county as compared to the rest.
Well, and I think dependent on what Michael said, what passes with the state budget. So if the state all of a sudden is taxing both, then if we're going to apply a new thing, it has to be applied to everyone so that all entities are now getting both.
Right.
I suppose one of the things as well with the state intervention is that it was only supposed to be Airbnb from what I read, and that they're not looking across all of the platforms. So they'd be looking at an Airbnb agreement. So that's one of the things to keep in mind, is that it would still strip out and leave out the other platforms, as opposed to it being across all of the platforms. That they would be targeting right away.
And I'm sure some of the same concerns we've raised relative to that will come up at the state level as well, with Airbnb feeling like they're being unfairly targeted.
And whether or not the information I saw was based around April as being sort of the time that their timeline, and whether or not, because obviously we're at the end of January now, looking at February, whether or not they're going to be able to hit that timeline, and especially looking at where Airbnb is at the moment, whether or not they are going to acquiesce so quickly. So that is going to be the question. The question mark is whether or not they'll get that in place for April.
So that will be the other thing that I will get up to speed as far as where they are in the legislative process and what the proposals are, so that we can, be informed by that as well.
Okay, so if we can get up to speed on the governor's proposal. Also, you and Michael are going to talk about what's going on in the city and how we can avoid. Our goal is not to disadvantage or hurt the city.
Right.
So we have to, figure that piece out. And I do know that Art, Ron, and Heidi were going to get together to talk about the compliance piece. I don't believe that's happened because Ron just came back today from surgery. So even though he was working from home, so I think we need to, the three of you need to get together and have that discussion. And Art clearly has a vision there that we want to take a look at.
That makes perfect sense.
Art, do you have anything to add, or?
No, nothing right now, but I think Heidi, Ron, and I can talk about this and be ready to present something. We'll email something around after we talk, and hopefully we can do that this week.
Well, that would be great.
Okay, Supervisor Mussman, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just a little confused. Are you amending what you already sent in with the mortgage tax?
We're not doing anything at this point. We're going to look into it, but we're not going to slow down the sales tax and mortgage tax request.
Yeah, so if you can amend it, when would the occupancy tax go into effect?
I mean, we originally projected at our last meeting 2022 for that, but I don't see us changing that right now. If we get any better information at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Chairman, I have a question, probably for Samantha. Is there a way, it seems like there's so many intricacies, like the state might tax Airbnb, but not other formats. Is there a way in our legislation to say anybody that has an overnight guest and charges a fee is going to pay 8% tax at the end of the day? And then if Hudson charges 6, we're going to charge them the additional 2. If they're charged through the state because they're Airbnb, we're not going to charge them at all. But if they're not charged through the state because they're through VRBO instead of Airbnb, then we're going to charge them the whole 8. Like, is there a way to make legislation so that everyone's going to pay 8%? And then what you pay to us is going to be dependent on what the state or the city of Hudson or other places are charging you? Because that seems like the most fair way to go about it if we can write the legislation that way.
So that is the crux of it, is actually getting the legislation drafted. So that way you are saying that like the tax or the TOT that you're paying is 8% blanket. And then the onus is basically on the people who are paying the tax as to whether or not they're remitting straight to the state. If they are just getting Airbnb versus, or just using Airbnb versus you. The one thing is just making sure that you can audit those people or find a way to figure out, okay, well, this person has paid this amount to Airbnb versus VRBO. If you don't have like a systematic approach to that component, they'll still fall through the cracks. So the place that I would take as the best example is Massachusetts, because Massachusetts has state legislation for payment directly to the state at the moment. And basically what happens is the state remits the tax, and it's quite high depending on the place. So some places will be 14%, some places are at 6%. So there is sort of a bit in between where they have the opportunity to basically levy a specific city-wide tax. And so depending on the place, each different constituent city and town will sort of contract with us in order for them to actually remit the tax either directly through us if it hasn't gone to the state. And basically we would look at how much has been remitted overall, who are probably the people who are actually getting the most or making the most money, and then basically looking at, okay, those people are making the most money, let's now audit what they've done and seen the activity and understand whether or not they've remitted the correct amount of tax.
PJ, the current mechanism for collecting sales tax, the state collects it, and then they pay us our 4%.
That's correct.
So they would keep so it's actually, we get 4%, the state keeps 4%, and then we would just distribute it based on what we get back from the state. So we're going to use the same mechanism. The state would collect all the occupancy tax if we're doing it as part of the sales tax, and then return it to us on a 50% basis.
So yeah, the advantage of the occupancy tax is that the locality gets to keep 100% of it,
Yeah. Well,
of that you collect.
yeah. So we just have to figure out what mechanism we want to use. You know, whether.
I guess I wanted.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to clarify: is our ultimate goal parity between the different offerings of lodging? And I think that's a reasonable goal. But one scenario is that if New York, in essence, if New York State passes a parity legislation this year, is our job complete, and we no longer are seeking to sort of levy any additional lodging tax in the county.
It may be. I don't know. This is today's the first I heard of that, so I need to get some more information regarding what the governor's proposal is. Our job isn't complete, I guess, if we're looking at, the compliance end of it. And, one of the ideas that Art had brought up was the idea that the county contract on behalf of the towns, and then, try to get a better deal by doing it in mass, and then sort of carving out each town's share, as we move on.
Michael, it's PJ. I read that too, and I kind of interpreted it, and again, it's confusing, but I kind of interpreted it that the governor wants to apply sales tax on a parity level to everybody. But what we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about an occupancy tax over and above the sales tax, correct?
Yeah, I think it's
That's what I'm clarifying.
So, yeah, so this is, the sales tax would be the sales tax, and that would come back to the county and distribute it to the towns, but the occupancy tax is a separate issue.
And will we collect that directly?
Yeah, depending upon how the legislation is set up, yeah.
And the one other thing that I wanted to bring up is in the email I sent, I mentioned that we need to define short-term rentals and things like that. One thing which you may or may not be aware of is that over the summer, and particularly with COVID, there was a huge rise in private campsites that were available on individual rural properties. There are websites such as Hip Camp, where there are people locally who are making thousands and thousands of dollars renting out either just vacant areas on their property or a fully equipped campsite. So one of the things that had happened with some of the municipalities, let's say Chatham, for example, having a zoning regulation that required the building inspector to come in, so on and so forth, is that type of thing slipped through the cracks because a building inspector is not going to inspect someone's tent. It's a totally different type of thing. It sounds like we would be able to include those types of platforms and really have a broad occupancy tax that applied even to these transient structures. And that's the kind of thing that again, we can kind of be ahead of the curve and anticipate rather than following suit with what the governor is doing and saying, okay, well, let's just start with Airbnb. Now let's tack on VRBO or so on and so forth. But we can try to kind of cast a broader net that would also capture these kind of unconventional farm stays and things like that as well.
Hi, this is Annie. It's my understanding that camping campsites do not and cannot be charged for an occupancy tax.
Wouldn't the occupancy tax essentially be as we define it?
I think that that's not a possibility. So I would just suggest a little digging into that.
Okay. And now that would include things like Airstreams on people's property, in addition to things like tenting and that kind of thing.
It's like our campsites that we have quite a few, and I don't think that the occupancy tax goes to campsites. anywhere in the state of New York.
I think that's
I
something
can
that
check.
we can certainly look into as well.
Yeah, I would look into it, and I'll check with my counterpart from Warren County.
And even if it
Yeah.
hasn't been done, I don't know that it's necessarily prohibited. But it's just something to take
I
into
know.
consideration.
We'll look into it because something tells me it's prohibited. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay.
Okay, I'm muting myself now.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything?
Linda
Samantha,
does.
Well, wait.
Linda had her hand up.
All right, Linda, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe I missed some of these meetings, but does each town have to create some kind of code for this occupancy tax? I guess this is to Heidi.
In terms of
Whoever, sorry.
in terms of the compliance, yes. If they don't have something already, and they have to look at their zoning.
So it's a zoning change.
It'd be a zoning change in terms of compliance, not the tax. The tax is a whole separate entity. Okay, Ron?
yeah, Samantha, you were supposed to send me a sample contract. I don't know if you did.
I would have sent it with our with the email that I'd sent over to you. Was it not in there?
All I saw was the presentation.
I'll send it again. I do have an extra quote for you, so I will send it again.
Okay.
Okay. So just to recap quickly, Ron, Art, and Heidi need to get together and talk about the whole compliance piece and how we can sort of do a contract which would cover for the county, but would cover all the towns. Heidi and Michael are going to talk about issues regarding the city. We also need to, everything's circling around Heidi now. But we also need to look at the governor's legislation or the governor's proposal in the budget, which I need to take a look at myself and just see what that all means, and maybe we can figure that out. And EJ and Ron, can you maybe talk to NISAC about that as well to get their interpretation? Is there anything else we need to?
Chairman, if you don't mind, I think the last presentation we saw was 5% tax was mentioned. Is that still on the table, or is that?
It was a 4%, I believe.
It's 4%. It was an error on my part.
Okay.
Yeah, it was we from the beginning. This committee at least has talked about a 4% tax.
Right.
Okay.
Because Hudson's, I think our plan is to not include Hudson in the occupancy tax. It's not, I feel like it's not quite my place to say, but my suggestion would be that the county levies an occupancy tax regardless of whether or not the sales tax parity goes through, just because it's an income stream that we can make use of, which is what Dutchess does. And I think my sense is that it doesn't really harm occupancy. So my sense is that regardless, we should do it.
Yep. I agree with that, by the way.
Okay.
In
which case we'd be looking at all forms of lodging then, right? Not just the online brands, but hotels and motels as well.
Yep. Art, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't, but I think Ron and Heidi, what I'll do is coordinate with the two of you and set up a Zoom meeting for some time in the next day or two when you guys are available. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Art.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can I just ask on my end, because it feels like you guys are wrapping up soon, but I just wanted to sort of understand more about the dates and stuff and timelines. So that way I have more of an understanding about what we should be doing on our end and how we can sort of help facilitate. So obviously we've gone through quite a few meetings so far. Generally what we try and do is have like more of a streamlined process, so we know, okay, you guys are looking at moving forward on this date or implementing at this time, and then basically working back from there so that we can look at what we would need on our end for implementation. Obviously it's a bit different because you guys have cities as well as the county. And some of the cities and towns have already moved forward, whereas the county is still looking at the tax. But really just being able to sort of strip out and understand if you have an idea in your mind as to what the timelines are now, and then we can basically work back from that. Because I think you guys were talking about 2022 now, but the last time I thought you guys were looking at implementing your tax by March. So I'm just not really fully clear.
No, I think we were talking about getting a resolution
Okay,
prepared by March,
okay,
but it would always be 2022.
okay.
Because whatever we do, and dependent on how we do it, we were under the assumption that we would have to send it to the state legislature for approval.
Okay.
And Samantha, I think if there was anything that we were talking about doing in the short term, it was getting compliance information for the towns that are interested in tracking the STRs in their communities from an inspection and oversight perspective, just so that can get started as quickly as we can get the data flowing.
Okay. And I suppose I know we've met or you've sort of liaised with me already, and you're speaking to one of my colleagues. It's really just understanding as well from a holistic perspective, like who else would be involved in that at that point, or else they are just sort of single contracts until we get the county moving. So that's the other part that has to that I need some clarity on moving forward as to whether or not there are any other people that would be wanting to move now as opposed to in the future in 2022.
I think that's what part of Ron and Heidi's committee is going to take a look at. Samantha?
Yeah, I think even Ankrum, even though we have a proposal, I think from Bruce that was very supportive of what we wanted to do, we're going to want to understand what the county compliance information deal can be to put that in perspective with what a single town signing up on our own would be offered, just so we're not committing ourselves to something only in 3 months to find the county can provide that for us for 20% of what we're paying.
Yeah.
So we need to resolve the county issue as quickly as possible, I think.
That's why I want to see a contract, Samantha. We got to roll the towns into that.
Okay.
What the cost would be. And then I got to figure out the true cost, because this is all coverable under the governor's shared service program.
And I
suppose the county can provide a service to all these towns at a much reasonable and cheaper price than if they were to do it on their own. And that difference is 100% payable back to the towns in the county. That's what we're striving for too.
Perfect.
So I need to see a contract and how we're going to construct that with the compliance issue with each town, carving out the city.
Perfect. I think the one question is going to be, again, because it is sort of a chicken and egg situation where because we don't have the information from the county at the moment, even if I send over the quote that we've created, that is going to be county specific as opposed to it being county plus town and city, because we don't have that information. So once I have that information, I have to take it back to our executive team to approve, and then we go forward from there. And so I'll send over the quote that I had prepared, but that is our standard quote as opposed to the terms and conditions that will apply across both the towns and the cities and county at the moment.
Yeah, but that standard quote it's not taking in the 18 towns in the county.
Yeah, it won't, because I don't know if all 18 towns are going to do it, or if it's just going to be strip out Hudson. That's what I need to have more clarity on as to what it is that I'm actually offering. And generally, the way that I've done it in other towns and counties across New York, is basically there's the county structure, but they actually already have like a TOT tax in place. You could do it that you don't have it, and at least you'll have the address identification information. And as you said, if it is coming through from the state anyways, then it's just information that you have to be able to drive. And the one thing that I will say, and again, this is based around other places that we work with, is that you can retroactively charge the tax because, well, I won't say for you guys specifically, but a lot of places are retroactively charging the tax back to people because they could have charged the tax and they were actually responsible for it based upon the legislation. Whether or not you guys choose to do that is obviously up to you, but it gives you that information, and at least we could go ahead with having sort of both components in there. But yeah, there is the question mark for me, and obviously I have to present it to our executive team as to what it is specifically that you guys want. Is it across everywhere except Hudson, and then it's the full county? Is it just sort of pick and choose depending on what anybody else wants as they sort of roll out regulations? That's basically the granularity that I'll need to know. Yeah, based up, and then I'll have to present it back to our executive team.
Yeah, then I got to present, because each town supervisor needs to know what the cost is going to be to each town, whether or not they want to opt in or not. They still have the possibility of opting out and going on their own if they want. Okay, so I need to know that so each supervisor can make a decision on whether or not to opt in or out. And as far as going back, it really depends on when the legislation takes in place and what the date is. It can't retro beyond that. So if it goes in effect 1/1 of 2022, that's it. That's the date. I don't see you. I don't. You can't retro back to 2020 if the legislation is set for 1/1/2022.
I suppose it is looking at the interpretation of the legislation and whether or not the hotel, the TOT tax that was there, because it's transient occupancy, whether or not like the county itself considers that having applied to the rest of like STRs and camping sites. That's basically what other places have grappled with before and said, yes, they should have been paying it. So it's just a question as to whether or not you decide to enforce it. But there are a slew of different municipalities that have gone back and said, yes, this should have always been collected from these people because they are transient occupants.
Yeah, I'm not following that.
Okay. So we have more, every time we have one of these meetings, we have more homework. It seems like I thought we were pretty much there, but apparently not.
Matt, I've got one more question for Samantha, going back to Ron's point. Samantha, is it possible for you to give us a proposal that says if you do business with the county and towns opt in for the compliance information, it will cost the towns X dollars per STR in their community, but if the towns do business with you directly, it will cost Y dollars per STR, just so we can understand the value of the county deal? Can you do that?
That's basically what I'll have to do, is sort of look at the two options, because at the moment they are kind of it's just theoretical. So I'll look at the two different options, and I have to obviously get it approved, but I can present that as different options and then move on from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next meeting, 22nd of February. It seems like Mondays are the days we meet with this committee, so.
I have one more question.
Yeah, Supervisor.
Is there any boilerplate zoning idea that can be given to each town? I mean, I get calls from different places. Anyways, it seems like everybody's inventing this on their own. Is there a kind of boilerplate idea for this zoning? I don't know, maybe to help move this along, because everybody seems to be struggling. I know Taconic, Philmont, there's different people working on it.
I presume that question was to me, so I will answer that. We do have a consultant, like a planning consultant that works with us, and that is his remit is basically to help different communities. So he is seen as being an expert in the area, and yeah, like I have a customer right now that is that we're working with, and they're in cottage country or in like a traditional cottage country. They need to get their ordinance back by the 24th to council, and we just started working with them. So basically, obviously, we don't necessarily want to have all of them that it's a fast turnaround, but that is his remit, is generally to help you through the process. Obviously, as a consultant, there is an extra consulting fee, but yeah, there is the opportunity to do that. The other option that's available to you is we do have an online tool, like a draft ordinance tool, where you populate the information, it spits something out. But the one thing with the draft ordinance tool is it gives you all of the information and then you have to pare it down. Whereas with the consultant, if he takes you from beginning to end, then it is a lot more tailored to your needs. And he does work across all of the US. So he knows, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And as well, he's up to speed on, what people are specifically doing at the moment. The free component to that is if you had like a draft ordinance and you want him to review it, then the draft ordinance review is free.
Thank you. I was just going to say there are towns too that already have ordinances as part of their zoning, which are all public record, that we can look at even within Columbia County. I know, for example, my town has nothing, and we're actually convening our zoning, review committee to start making changes to our zoning law, which to impact, this particular issue.
My question wasn't necessarily directed to Samantha. It was either to the chairman or Heidi, but I appreciate the information, Samantha. Thank you.
I guess the answer is there's a variety of resources. So.
And I'm not familiar with any specific template for the zoning. It's been sort of tried in a couple of areas and seems to be unique to the individuals within that municipality thus far.
New Lebanon recently passed short-term rental zoning regulations. I'd be happy to share with anybody who's looking to potentially do the same. We tried to find a balance between having everyone registered with us, basic safety in place without being over onerous. And I think we did a decent job striking that balance. So I'd be happy to share with any other towns that are looking to do that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Ankrum just passed a law in November that included zoning for short-term rentals, and I'll be happy to share that if somebody wants. Should we send it to someone who can be the repository for all these documents?
Why don't we all send them to Kelly? Because I know Chatham has one too, and then Kelly could send one email to all the supervisors. Here's a few examples of some of the towns.
Ours actually failed.
I'm sorry.
Believe it or not, at the last minute, there was a 3-2 vote and it was shot down. But I'd still be willing to share it if someone wants an example of a failed zoning proposal.
I will admit, Supervisor Collins, when we did ours, we used yours as a don't go quite this extreme because it was not supported. We tried to find
Well,
out.
what the amazing was actually 2 people thought it was too lenient. I mean, 2 people thought it was too lenient. 1 person thought it was too strict, and then 2 of us voted for it. So, we tried to add a little regulation into the hamlets where houses are on top of each other. But we tried to make it lax so we didn't really have building inspectors going into someone's home. So we did it by an application process, and some people still really pushed hard for occupancy requirements, and we didn't want to do that, and that's why it was voted down from a leniency perspective. But yeah, people can look at my poor example if they want it.
Well, anything will help at this point.
I guess we could have what not to do and what to do, right? 2 options.
Kelly, would you mind just sending something out to all the supervisors, just saying if your town has passed anything or considered anything, please send it to me, and then you can compile it all and send it to all of us?
Can do, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Say, while I have Heidi and Ron, is 10 o'clock tomorrow morning good for the two of you for a Zoom call to talk about compliance information?
Unfortunately, not for me. On Mondays and Tuesdays, I usually have other obligations. But Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the only obligation I have is usually the first half of Thursday, I'm doing support court for the county.
How
But
about
other
10
than that, I'm
o'clock,
usually
10
free.
o'clock on Wednesday then?
That
Oh,
should
wait,
be-
I can't do Wednesday, sorry. All right, let me look at the calendar and I'll get back to you guys via email later this afternoon. And we can
Okay.
find some time that works for all three of us. Okay,
Okay, was February 22nd all right with everyone?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's good for me.
all right, so let's, we've got a lot of work to do yet. So we'll reconvene on the 22nd with report outs from Art and Ron's committee and Heidi, and then Heidi and Michael can report on what they've talked about and so on.
At 2 p.m., Matt?
2 p.m.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, a motion to adjourn.
I'm moving.
so moved. I'll second it.
All right, Donnell moved it. Second, Art. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.